Hello everyone. Today we'll talk about a concept that's becoming more and more important in ecology, novel ecosystems. So as humans change the planet, a lot of ecosystems have shifted so much that they can really go back to the way they used to be. We call these novel ecosystems. Basically, they're systems where the physical environment like soil, water, and climate, and the living species and how they interact have all been changed by humans. In other words, the system now looks and works differently from anything that was there historically. So a novel ecosystem isn't just a damaged or degraded system, it's fundamentally different. It has a new mix of species, often includes not native ones. The environment, like the soil and hydrology, may be permanently altered, and yet it organizes itself and persists. And because of these changes, returning it to what it was, it usually is unrealistic. So in this graph, for instance, the solid lines represent the thresholds where it is unlikely that states C, E, or F can return to the historical state A. So how they arise? Well, novel ecosystems form when human pressures push an ecosystem past a tipping point. So this can happen when new species are introduced intentionally or accidentally, and sometimes those species become invasive and take over. Novel ecosystems can also develop because of big land use changes like farming, urban development, or when all farmland or industrial areas are abandoned and start to regenerate on their own. And in other cases, large-scale changes like climate change or shifts in ocean and atmospheric chemistry can tip ecosystems into entirely new states. For example, think about a cold adapted forest or lake system that used to be dominated by native species that thrive in cooler temperatures. As the climate warms, those native species start to decline, but warmer adapted alien species or invasive species, say a heat-tolerant tree and a warm water fish, move in and take over. The dominant species are totally different now from the original community, but the ecosystem function can actually stay surprisingly stable. In other words, the players have changed, but the roles they perform, like providing shade, storing carbon, or grazing algae, are still being filled. So in some cases, even when the species change, like that example where native cold adapted species are replaced by warm adapted ones, the ecosystem can still keep doing many of the same things. The functions don't always disappear, and that leads to an important point. Novel ecosystems aren't always a bad thing. They can still provide habitat, they can offer useful ecosystem services like green space or soil stabilization. They can maintain basic ecological functions, just with a different cast of species. So it's not about labeling them good or bad, it's about understanding what they can still do and how we manage that moving forward. Now, the big question is, can we just restore a novel ecosystem back to the way it used to be? In many cases, the answer is no. The physical conditions, the soils, the hydrology, even the climate may have changed so much that the historical ecosystem simply can't exist there anymore. And the species pool may be totally different too. So trying to force a return to the past can actually make things worse. A lot of novel ecosystems also have reduced native biodiversity, and invasive or non-native species may be firmly established. So all of this makes conservation decisions much more complicated. We have to ask whether restoration is realistic or whether managing the system as it is may be the better, more sustainable option. So when we talk about conservation in the context of novel ecosystems, the big takeaway is that not everything can or needs to go back to what it was. Sometimes the most meaningful work happens when we focus on what's here now. For example, these urban forests might not look anything like the original historical ecosystem of that area, but it still provides shade, habitat, carbon storage, and space for people to connect with nature. And this wildlife corridor shows how even heavily altered landscapes can still support movement and survival for animals. So instead of trying to recreate the past in every situation, a lot of conservation today is about building resilience, keeping ecosystems functioning, and balancing ecological needs with human ones. Novel ecosystems challenge some of our traditional ideas, yes, but they also open the door to creative, practical solutions when we manage them thoughtfully.